The topic of today's podcast is the importance of inquiry in learning with Trevor MacKenzie. Our quote for today is from a recent blog post from our guest Trevor MacKenzie. In it, he writes these 5 thought-provoking words, which he says, "Curiosity is a powerful thing." What are y'all thinking about that? Rena, Paul? Rena, what do you want to say?
It is very powerful. And I think about how when students or just people in general are genuinely curious about something, then they're more likely to engage in it deeply, want to, spark exploration. And then we talk about critical thinking. And I know as someone always trying to promote STEM and science, especially in elementary, we're like, oh, but we need more reading. But we need to give them something to want to read about. So how do we get them curious? And I was thinking about this with my older son. So we're big baseball fans, and watching baseball, thinking about spring training, we got really curious. He was like, Mom, why aren't there any left-handed catchers? And why can left-handed players only play, first base or pitcher? And I was like, well, I don't know. Well, because he was genuinely curious about that, and it's really easy because of all the access now, he started doing research. So he's like, okay. And then he got really interested. And then he was like, well, there's only been a few players in the history that are ever left-handed, but why is that? And that's because the game, the way it's set up. Well, why is the game set up that way? What's the history of the game? Okay, why did the base runners run counterclockwise instead of clockwise? Like, why did that happen? And we just went on this whole tangent, learning about angles and throwing and why they are this. But he got really deep into it because he was genuinely curious and interested. So that's what I think about this whole power of inquiry. When we're genuinely curious, we seek out answers. We ask deeper questions. We engage more fully, and because we want to, and it's fun and interesting. Yeah.
I love that example of your son there, Rena. And why doesn't that happen more in school, right? I mean, that is the magic ticket to everything. It's motivation, it's learning, it's retention, it's engagement, it's all of those things. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, kids kind of get that schooled out of them too often. And I don't think there's any teacher out there that wants that to happen, but that's kind of what happens sometimes. So I'm really fired up about our conversation today, because I think inquiry and inquiry learning is kind of one of the keys to unlocking that again and getting kids really tuned into what they're learning in school. And looking forward to the conversation.
I mean, exactly, right? Curiosity didn't kill the cat in my world. It made the cat stronger. So today, we're going to try to jump into a conversation with someone who really digs deeply and thinks about this idea of inquiry. And our guest for today is Trevor MacKenzie. Trevor is an experienced teacher, an author, a keynote speaker, an inquiry consultant who has worked in schools throughout the world. You just want to welcome Trevor to our show. Welcome.
Hey, Trevor.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you all. Kind of you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Before we move forward, one of the things that we enjoy doing is helping our audience really ground themselves in our guest. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you get here? Some of your just tips and tidbits about yourself.
Yeah, happily. Yeah. So I'm in my 23rd year of teaching. I'm saying my Michael Jordan year this year.
Hey, women.
So I teach high school English here in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. I've spent the majority of my career teaching high school. I've taught all grade levels from kindergarten all the way up to high school, but my sweet spot is with the bigs, as I like to say. And when I started to teach quite early on, I was really struck by disengaged students. I worked with a lot of at-risk youth in my first 7-8 years of teaching, where the curriculum was not something that they were willing to explore. There was a lack of relevance in their schooling experiences. And gosh, I cut my teeth in those first 7 years, really figuring out how to flip the script to a certain degree and how to have the curriculum come alive for students, how to build really strong relationship with kids in school that perhaps wanted to not be there first and foremost. And slowly that led me on a path to my own professional learning, my own action research, my own understanding the school of thinking that is inquiry-based learning. It's nothing new. It's generations old for that matter. And and we are truly standing on the shoulders of giants. So I'd say my authorship, my consultancy, my research is contemporary in that regard. And, maybe a dozen years ago after my first book was published, I started to visit schools globally and looking at what curiosity and the impact of curiosity, what it has on student learning and what it has on teacher practice as well. We often talk about curiosity for kids, while, teachers being curious is a big piece of the puzzle. So, and now, like I said, I'm still teaching. I'm in the classroom and I'm still visiting schools around the world, helping them adopt inquiry practices. So excited to share some of that work with you today and just, hear your thoughts on curiosity, agency, and engagement in and of itself, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
First of all, shout out to a fellow English teacher. I love it. I was
Awesome.
high school English as well for a long time. And you said that it's nothing new, but I think everybody sort of has their own little flavor of inquiry. It means something different to everybody. So do you want to talk about what inquiry is for you and maybe why it's such an important ingredient in our classroom?
Yeah, Paul, your question, its importance cannot be understated. Like, I bet if I were to ask you each to stop and jot a definition of inquiry, we'd each have a different definition. And the research is the same. When we look at the body of research around inquiry, it's quite confusing. Some research says inquiry is the best thing for kids, and some research says it's not the best thing for kids. And in fact, they're talking about two different things. They're not even talking about the same thing. So, as a school engaging in this work, it's really important that we define what we're talking about. And that way teachers and families and students can come to the table of learning with a common understanding. If I were to just boil it right down to one phrase for us, and in fact, we've already started to talk about it, it's that inquiry is curiosity. If we're getting our kids curious about what they're learning about, we're already on the train. We're already doing a lot of the work. Then we can start talking about some fine structures. We could talk about, a gradual release of responsibility over learning long term. But I mean, if our kids aren't curious, if they're not switched on, we're going to lose a lot of those amazing skills that we know are important for today's world, right? Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, all those things come as a byproduct of curiosity. So I think if we can just define it as such, and then we could start identifying structures, we can get on the same page, Paul.
Mm-hmm. It's so helpful and important to be on the same page. Speaking the same language, as we say. And you talked a little bit about your journey. You've been K-12. We're in the similar boat. I've worked K-12, and you talked about a little bit about your first 7 years. So we're curious. Our listeners are curious. How did this journey into inquiry really begin for you? What sparked your interest into inquiry and led you down this path of research and then sharing all of this knowledge?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think a colleague saw me grappling with some big ideas, like saw me treading water and saw me engage in some really meaningful reflection and learning with regards to best supporting the students that I was working with. And it was my teacher librarian at the time. And I remember quite clearly he handed me a book to read, and he said, I think you might want to check this work out, right? Like, I see you struggling. Here's perhaps a solution. And at that time, it was a book by Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins, Understanding by Design. And Jay's turned into a mentor and friend. So when I think back to origin stories and now, co-presenting with someone or having those conversations, it's really, the through line is there, right? But early on, it was, kind of finding that school of thinking, finding this richer body of work that has been around for decades and generations, and slowly becoming more familiar with it, naming things that I was doing, and that's called this, or that's what I'm doing there. There's some research behind this work. And slowly that turned into sharing my work more publicly. Like, I think 15 years ago, blogging, tweeting, like sharing work in a more open space. And slowly that got some interest from other schools and other spaces around the world. I remember quite clearly being invited to speak at a conference and thinking, oh my God, I'm paying to go to a conference and I'm paying my way to go speak to an audience. Like, this feels really weird. But there was a publisher in that audience who listened to me share some stories from my classroom, and she asked me to write a book at the time. And I thought, I don't have a book in me. Like, I'm just a teacher, quote unquote, right? And that book turned into 4 books, and global partnerships, and sharing this work more broadly, and engaging in some really rich research at higher ed, exploring what it means to teach from an inquiry stance. So, that's a loose through line of the career, but definitely it started by a caring friend, a caring colleague who said, "Hey, I think you want to read this book." And gosh, that has just launched me into a career of learning and unlearning and relearning that I'm just so grateful for.
And I just think about how we do that for students all the time.
Bingo,
right?
right?
And I love hearing that story for you, or, even for colleagues of mine, and how we can support each other as well.
Well, I think that teacher librarian, I think what he saw was the just right book. Like he thought really clearly about what I needed, and he handed me the just right thing. And I think that's what we do as colleagues. We see a friend struggling or working through a challenge with students, and we try our best to hand them the just right strategy or the just right technique. And sometimes it's the just right book. And I think that's what makes school so amazing, is when we care about each other, when we're engaged in rich learning, and we got each other's backs. And that's a little bit of the origin story of how that formed for me, for sure.
See, now I'm going to ask you to be on your Peter Parker, right? We just went through your origin story. Uncle Ben was like, with power comes great responsibilities. Now you are the wise vet, right? I'm going to try to ask you, you describe this approach that's talk about scaffolding to really create student-centered learning experiences by identifying their student inquiry, right? What they're interested in, what's their curiosity. For those who are trying to figure out a way to look at their classroom, think about centering their students' needs, what does this approach look like? What are some of the things that you want someone to think about as they're beginning, just to start dipping their toes, but when they're in this moment of like you said, that deep reflection on your student in your classroom before you got handed the book? What could you describe as this approach to help scaffolding and to center students' learning?
Yeah. Well, Rena, I love your story about your son getting really hooked into baseball and asking big questions about baseball. And that's what we would call free inquiry. That's very much a student-led topic and student-led exploration. And you're the guide on the side, the guide on the ride, supporting some of those decisions and kind of providing some buffers, some bumpers, if you will, to that exploration. But, free inquiry can be incredibly fulfilling and rewarding. Teachers have a curriculum that we need to teach, and we have objectives that we need to teach. And I'd love to know my curriculum so deeply and so beautifully that when a child is interested in baseball, I could just bring my curriculum there. And so I think a lot of teachers do that beautifully. They know their curriculum inside out, and they could see it's malleable, it's agile to a certain degree. But for teachers who are new to this work, a first step we need to take is try to get our students curious about our curricular outcomes, try to get our kids curious about our curricular objectives. In the inquiry teaching school of thinking, this is called provocation. We want to design something that is going to ignite their wonderment, ignite their curiosities. It's not just an anticipatory set. It's not just a hook. It's accessing prior knowledge. And then an outcome of provocation should be student-generated questions, like questions that they want to know about. And if we design provocation really beautifully, then that's the entry point into the curriculum. Then the questions they have are curricular in nature. There's going to be some academic jargon. There's going to be an academic through line to their questions. And so that's a critical first step, is provocation design. It needs to be real world. It needs to be approachable to your students. Like, just because Paul thinks it's cool doesn't mean his students will think it's engaging, right? So we really have to know our students and put ourselves in their shoes to design rich provocation as an entry point to the curriculum. If we don't do that, then we may have 30 Reina's sons in our class wanting to explore 30 different things, and it's going to be like herding cats. Which is, quite honestly, that's what the research says bad inquiry is. It's when you're trying to wrangle all these different topics and all these different ideas, and it turns into a hot mess express. So that the key move is planning provocation to curriculum first and foremost. That's something many teachers kind of tinker with, but bringing more mindfulness and intentionality as that is your academic entry point is a huge move.
Mm. I love that provoke. I love that provoke.
I'm wondering, you said you got K-12 experience. Can you give us like an example of what a provocation experience might look like, maybe at an elementary level and then at a secondary? Maybe you have a favorite one you've run into along the way?
Yeah, so one way I support schools, guys, is when I visit them, we do learning labs where I will visit the school and I'll have a small team of teachers and we'll co-plan a lesson. And then I'll go co-teach that lesson with that small team of teachers. And so often it's the same darn lesson 3 times and we're all watching it, we're refining it. And then at the end of the day, we reflect on said lesson. Like there's no better PD than watching teachers teach and talking shop about our craft, right? And so one of my partnerships is in Sacramento, Natomas Unified School District. They do amazing work centering student identity and all they do. Just 3 weeks ago, I was down there. I taught a grade 1 lesson. And then the very next day, I'm teaching high school. So, Paul, these are really timely examples. The grade 1 example we did was we showed them a 10-minute provocation in 2-minute chunks. And the provocation was this beautiful video of a polar bear who wanders into this northern Canadian town called Churchill, Manitoba. And Churchill's world famous for tourists wanting to go spot a polar bear and take photos of a polar bear. But the locals, they have to put up with the polar bear digging in the trash and ransacking the town. And so there's this tension between locals and tourists and the wildlife, quite literally. And sustainability is kind of a key theme in the provocation. Now, keep in mind, these are grade 1s. Like these are 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. So we're watching this provocation. Every 2 minutes, we pause the provocation. And I say to the children, turn and talk. What are some things that you're noticing right now that you're seeing? So a turn and talk, simple move, right? Like let's do more turn and talks in class. These little children identify such beautiful language from the provocation that is very much academic in nature. Why? Because we designed the provocation to be such. So I'm busily creating anchor charts of the vocabulary they're pulling out of the provocation, if you will. We watched the provocation for 6 minutes. We didn't even watch the full thing. I've got 2 anchor charts of rich vocabulary. Now I ask them to ask questions about what they're wondering about, what they're curious about. With the littles, we give them some question stems. Question stems that lead to close-ended questions and question stems that lead to more open-ended questions. Things like what and when, those tend to lead to close, whereas why and how, those tend to lead to open. And now the students have all these universal supports in front of them, visibly in front of them, that they can use to write meaningful questions that, guess what, are curricular in nature. So that would be an example of a provocation with the littles. We're not even talking about question routines yet and what to do with their questions, right? We'll get to that later on in the episode, I'm sure. The very next day, I'm teaching high school. I'm teaching high school English with a colleague who's teaching a fantastic graphic novel series called Mouse. Have you guys read or seen Mouse before?
Yeah.
Is that the graphic novel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, set in the Holocaust and the mice and the cats, and it's amazing, rich in symbolism, such a beautiful series. So the provocation we had with those students was we photocopied a few pages from the graphic novel, we put them up around the room vertically on an anchor chart, and we rotated them through the graphic novel pages, asking them to identify things that we know they're going to have to identify on the summative assessment. Symbolism, conflict, imagery, figurative language, all those rich things we know they need, but it's done in a collaborative nature. It's done from a stance of they're really curious about it because it's a totally transformative experience. They're not working individually on a worksheet in their desks. And then we see the evidence of their learning, Paul, right? Like because it's vertical, we can actually rotate through the room from the center and look at all their evidence of thinking. We could hear the evidence of thinking and discourse. So that would be an example of an easy provocation to do in an English setting is to make the learning visible, make it vertical, and then have students work through it together. So I'm curious, do both those examples make sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. A lot of nodding heads.
For sure. Rena's always writing notes.
I am writing notes. You know I'm writing notes because that's what I do. Sometimes I get lost.
Are you writing questions, Rena?
Well, we can talk more about questions. I do want to point out, so you've talked a little bit about your books. I want to give a little plug because your newest book is titled Inquiry Mindset, Questions Edition, cultivating curiosity and creating question competence. So maybe this is the point where we can get into a little bit more talking about questioning. I know I've done a lot of inquiry-based science and like the transition I'm focusing on next gen science standards, but
there we go. Yeah.
I'm curious, the emphasis on questioning you've talked about a little bit, but maybe you could get into more of questioning routines, telling us a little bit about that. And especially, I'm sure that you're supporting teachers, like you said, in different grade levels, but also cross subject. Like this can be used across content areas. It's not just for ELA.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So, the book really was born out of challenges I was seeing in classrooms, teachers doing provocation really, really well and getting kids really curious about the curriculum. And then teachers would say, I've got all these questions from kids. Now, what do I do with them? What do I answer them all? Do I assign them? Like, what do we do with all these questions? And so that's a really good problem to have. Like when you have kids curious about the curriculum and you have student generated questions. I was also hearing from some teachers, my kids have questions, but they're just not curricular. They're just not, they're kind of surface area. They don't have the depth that I would hope. They don't have the shelf life that I would hope. So for me, I did what I always do is I shared what I was doing with my students in my own classroom. What do I do to build question competence with my students? And I started to workshop those strategies with the schools that I support around the globe. So that's where the body of work around question routines really came from my own classroom, sharing those with schools. Question routines, there are 10 high impact question routines in the book. Some are really great for the primary levels. Some are really amazing for all levels. And then some are really amazing. We see them really most beautifully in the high school level. So we don't identify them as such. I would never say, this one has to be done with the primary kiddos. I really want teachers to give them a go and see where they land most beautifully, because I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised by how a teacher uses a question routine. So an example of a question routine is, I'll give you one, and I hope that without a visual for the audience, we can imagine what this might look like in a class. Imagine I go up to my whiteboard and I draw a long line, maybe 8 feet long across my whiteboard. And on the left side of that line, I write the word closed. And on the right side, I write the word open. And then I ask my students, turn and talk. What comes to mind when I say the phrase closed-ended questions? What kind of questions am I talking about, kids? And what we're going to do right now, can you guys play along? What comes to mind for each of you? What's an indicator, or what's a type of question? What would you respond to if a teacher asked you that?
A yes/no question.
Yeah, very
beautiful,
specific.
Something about yourself.
Okay, so as students are talking, as you're talking, I'm writing a list. I'm creating a list of indicators on the closed side. I'm hoping I write maybe 10 indicators. And students are going to use these descriptors to kind of reflect on their questions once they're asked to come and place them along that line, along that continuum. And then I ask them the same question for open. I'm going to say, what is an open-ended question? What comes to mind? What comes to mind for you guys?
Limitless. I mean, wide
open. No one right answer. Lots of different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Kids say the most beautiful stuff. How, right? They give us question stems like that, Winston. How, why, more thorough research, ungoogleable. Some kids say ungoogleable, right? Yeah. And so once we have those indicators flanking the continuum, now imagine we engage in some questioning from a provocation. And I ask students on their sticky noted questions to come and sort them along that continuum, right? And gosh, ask them to justify their placement along that continuum using the language that we just co-designed. So now I've got this really visible evidence. I've got this audible evidence of their thinking, of their learning. I've got all these beautiful skills, collaboration, critical thinking, communication. And then a move we might make is, kids, can you identify maybe 3 closed-ended questions that belong to one of the open-ended questions? Like, in order to explore the open, we've got to know the answer to these 3 closed. And kids literally, they zoom out, they back away from the continuum, and they start interrogating how the questions are connected. And so I think of anything we're researching, like I think of any hypothesis and what are the closed-ended questions we need to explore to deepen our understanding of that hypothesis in a science class, right? I think of any historical event, we want that historical event to be understood on a conceptual level, but there's some closed-ended stuff we need to know in that social studies curriculum to deepen our understanding of that conceptual understanding. So the question routines allow students to see the intention of how they write their questions matters. It has a big impact on how the questions are connected. Now, the next move I would make is I would plan my next lesson according to some of the richer questions. And when I say richer, I'm thinking, what are the questions that are most curricular in nature? Of all those questions in the continuum, can I cherry pick a few that are going to guide my next series of lessons? So that's the question continuum. Just visually, that long spectrum of questions with the co-designed indicators, students sorting and justifying their ideas, and then looking for connections across questions, guys. Does that one make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You're giving me all kinds of ideas for a PD I have coming up, so thank you.
Well, this is the best type of learning, where just from a conversation,
Yes.
You can get inspired to go do something, or teachers can say, oh, I can see how I can do that. Like, I just heard this guy speak about this for 6 minutes. I could go put this in the practice. So that's really a applicable PD, isn't it? So the 10 high impact question routines all have a very visible visual element to them. The book has about 120, 130 photographs in it of these routines in action. And you can find them all on my website, my Instagram, my LinkedIn. I'm very active there for teachers to go have a look at what, the continuum, but these other routines look like.
So I'm curious, you kind of alluded to this earlier. You said teachers wonder, well, what am I going to do? I've got all these questions. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking there's two paths here, right? There, you can have students individually pursue inquiry, or you can have a class as a community pursue inquiry. Where do you see it usually going, or what advice would you have give teachers as they're considering those two pathways?
Yeah, it depends, Paul. I totally agree. You could have it be very individualized and very agentic. Students are choosing their own pathway from that overarching experience. Or you can have it be a group experience, what we call a class inquiry. It depends on how competent are your students in the skills that they need to have that level of independence over their learning. So now we're talking about competencies. We're talking about those transferable skills. There's, dare I say, 21st century skills. Like, it's 2025 and we're still talking about 21st century skills. Why? Because they're pretty darn important, and teachers still, broadly speaking, might not be teaching them. So it depends on where your students are at with regards to those competencies, those skills. In my experience, I love to start with a class inquiry. Like, if you were to visit me at my high school at the start of the year, September, we would be all in the same area, the same depth of the pool, if you will. We'll be in the shallow end, a teacher-directed inquiry together. And slowly, as students become more aware of these competencies, more competent and proficient in them, then I'm going to engage in some gradual release of responsibility over learning. So at the end of the year, maybe they do a really deep dive, kind of like what Rena was describing with her son, right? But in my classroom, that free inquiry has to be curricular in nature. So for every step of independence and agency in the classroom, we need to provide structures and routines so our students feel competent and they can be successful. So the routines help us map out that structure for independence, Paul. So if you were to visit me, you'd see a class inquiry at the start of the year and definitely a gradual release across the months, where at the end of the year, it's a showcase of independent learning and free inquiry, if you will.
I love that progression of setting students up for success, because that's what we want, right? We want our students to be successful in this, because if they are, they're more likely to continue that down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. And, sadly, we don't talk enough about a degression of engagement or a degression of learning. We often talk about a progression and moves we make to lead to that level of independence. And I really encourage teachers, and in a safe way, get critical about the practices that lead to disengagement. And that those are the practices that if we continually do them, they lead to a degression. They lead to disengagement and disenchantment in the classroom. And so if we were to name strategies as a group here, like, what are the strategies that lead to kids checking out of school? And let's just cautiously use them. Like, there are some that we have to do every so often. But God, if that's our only tool in the toolkit, we're going to lose a lot of our students, and they're not going to develop all those amazing skills and competencies that we need them. So yes, a progression, and also let's be aware of the degression and the moves that we make, sadly, that lead to disengagement, if you will.
See, that leads into me where my question or my mind was going. Like, I love the idea of some people being like, I know my curriculum inside out. I'm the sage on the stage. I'm really good at like providing that information to students. So the questions that they ask really do not support either open end or curiosity. So my question to you is like, how can someone check themselves if they, as the teacher, are asking questions that does not create a sense of curiosity in their classroom, right? Like, what are some ways that a teacher can get a check on, like, what am I doing that is getting to your point of excluding interest from the classroom, right? Like, what are those strategies? Because you're talking about bringing in students, like questioning to the front, but I'm talking about what the teacher, like your last bit, is what the teacher is pushing out that either disengage a student. So what are some of those like strategies to catch that teacher to help them be more clear?
Yeah, well, I'll suggest a few. And the first one, it really comes down to, if we want certain dispositions and competency for the children and students we support, we need to be mindful of those in our own teaching stance. Like, we're talking about curiosity for kids. A curious educator, just like you said, check themselves. If you're curious, you're going to go in and really be reflective. Like, how are my students doing today? What's the temperature for learning today? What do I have planned? Do I need to adjust? Do I need to pivot? We're not coming in with a script thinking, okay, I'm going to go through this script and all kids are going to get in, and the ones who aren't are the ones that, fail the course. That the curiosity as a disposition for teachers is a massive stance in which a lot of those things that are problematic that you were describing, we're going to be more self-aware of. We're going to be asking questions of our practice, and we're going to be tinkering with our practice. Like, we may look at the benefit of slowing down and pausing at the start of a lesson rather than just diving into the curriculum thinking that we've got it all figured out. So there's a lot of research, and this isn't new research, this is decades old, that talks about dispositions of teachers. And I was going to throw it back to you right away. I was going to say, think of a colleague who you really deeply admire, who's really self-aware. What are the dispositions they have? I bet you those dispositions would mirror the exact dispositions we want for the children that we support and the youth that we support. So that's number one. Number two, really clear structures for getting to know your students. There's nothing more important than knowing the students you support. There are so many districts I work with who have adopted something like a know me before you teach me philosophy, where the first number of days, dare I say weeks, are focused on teachers getting to know kids and bringing the curriculum and assessments to the identities in the room of which they're supporting. So there's not this like, I've got the curriculum I need to cover and the curriculum's the wheel that's going to turn this machine. It's the most important aspect of my planning are the students before me, and I need to get to know them. So there are specific routines and structures for that one as well, where it allows us to slow down and begin to differentiate in our planning, not even differentiation in our teaching and differentiating in our lesson. So those would be two ones that really ring true to me: dispositions for teachers and pausing and really knowing the community of learners that you're nurturing and that you're supporting.
Thank you so much for that.
It's a lot to think about, and I know even it's relationships first, but sometimes and I'm just going to say where we are, budgets, time, like we keep saying that, but a lot of teachers don't really know how to do that. So what does that even mean or look like, or how do we apply it? And then I'm real curious with inquiry, kind of throw this one in here, and I currently support high school, and shockingly, AI has come up a ton. And then we talk about, hey, maybe I am a newer teacher and I'm not the best at my content, but now maybe AI, I'm trying to use that to support and help me. So I'm curious your thoughts around what kind of impact artificial intelligence has on this whole inquiry in the classroom.
Yeah, well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'd like to say I'm an early adopter. I never dive in head first, but I'm cautiously optimistic. And I suppose one thing I really value, and you've heard it come up several times in our chat, are the competencies, the skills. And I really wonder about any role of technology in developing said skills has to be explored for the good and the bad. What are the pros and the cons? And so I really caution teachers from having AI do the good work of planning, lesson planning. Like the beautiful work that we do is sitting in, thinking about our students and trying to plan learning that's relevant and meaningful. And I don't think AI has that pulse, that temperature check of your classroom. Some amazing things I'm seeing schools do is in the assessment realm of learning with regard to AI, using AI to provide feedback that we triangulate with a teacher in a one-on-one conference or with a peer in a peer-to-peer conference. I'm seeing some amazing things with teachers really getting their hands dirty and, asking AI, giving it certain prompts, giving it certain questions to generate amazing feedback for kids. And what that allows teachers to do is not be the sole feedback provider, but actually frees them up to sit with children and ask them if they understand the feedback or triangulate the feedback. Does the teacher agree with the feedback? And so you're actually seeing teachers have more time to sit with kids because they're incorporating some AI into the feedback cycle. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I have Zoom calls with, ed tech enthusiasts who have some kind of platform they want to pitch and they want my feedback on. And I'm cautious in that anytime students are getting answers from technology, I want them to triangulate that evidence. Like, that's just really good research. And so I'd love to see a platform where that's baked in, where, yes, we're engaging in AI, but then there's some kind of mechanism that forces students to triangulate and reflect and revise and share new understanding based on that triangulation. I think that's a lot of what teachers are doing. Teachers who are doing this work really, really beautifully are taking that responsibility on in their own, right. But gosh, if AI isn't doing that job or nudging that job, I think it's a shortcoming, to be quite honest. So as I said, cautiously optimistic. I'm tinkering with things with my own students, I think, as most teachers are. And feedback has really been something I'm quite excited about in the realm of, AI and the classroom.
I want to just follow up on Rena's question to tie it a little more specific to inquiry. So in the inquiry process, do you see AI impacting the actual inquiry process?
Yeah, I do. Well, right now, a key piece that some of my schools are working with and I'm doing with my own students is the notion of organization and researching, but organizing and sorting research into trends and concepts and kind of subcategories, kind of having it find the clusters of information, if you will. And I really appreciate that because, gosh, teenagers with executive functioning, wow, like that's a skill they need to flex. And so I see it as being a nice scaffold. I see it as being a really nice way for students to have something help them sort and organize. And then once we have that sorted and organized, like, where's the human element? The teacher coming in to confer with children and students and talk about what it is that they're noticing, what it is that they're seeing, and what they might do differently. So I think in terms of the organization of research, that's a neat aspect. I certainly don't see AI making inquiry useless. I certainly don't see AI making education useless or watered down. In fact, I see it as really showing the importance of the human element in the classroom. Relationships and that triangulation piece is really, really important.
Yeah, because when you think about it, chatbots are all about inquiry. If you don't ask the right question, you get nothing. I mean,
absolutely,
that's key.
And I think students see that. I think when students are engaged in that good work, the better their questioning, the better the outcome, right?
For sure. All right, it is time for us to jump into our toolkit. All right, what's in your toolkit today? Rena, why don't you go first?
Well, Trevor alluded to some of these. So, read his book, find out. I was thinking of some of the things I use a lot of I notice, I wonder structures with students, see, think, wonder, and then even he got into some of his question formation techniques. And I know I've used called QFT techniques with students, the whole idea and having it be focused on content standards and outcomes for students, but having them generate the questions. So I would encourage, it sounds like visit his website, look into some of that, and then even lots of AVID strategies out there around questioning. There's lots of different ways to do that, but you need to have some guidance. I feel like guide rails, because otherwise we are back to that just free, open, everyone. That does not give you results either.
All right, Winston, what about you? What's in your toolkit?
I was going to say that fits into mine, Rena. I think it's more the content-driven exploration. Like, as a teacher, I may not know everything about my content, but I can ask myself, what can students question within this curriculum that doesn't break it? Right? Giving them the opportunity to ask, why is this a thing? Why did this guy design this spaceship? Why? Right? Asking those questions about why, because again, some of the things that we learn is like, why the hell do I need it? So having that question allows for students to really ask so that they can dig in and try to break the curriculum, I think might help them be interested.
I love that you were asking why there. It reminds me of what my wife always says. It's like the 5 levels of why. You ask why 5 times, right? You keep asking why. Well, why? Well, why is that? And eventually you get far enough down the rabbit hole, you kind of get to the root of the whole issue.
It sounds like toddler questioning to me, Paul.
Yep.
True. See how wise those kids are?
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
Exactly.
Why are they wise? It is the wise makes them wise.
Dad joke.
I know, I couldn't help it. Well, I was going to say the whole provocation thing is so key. I mean, that leading to questions, to me, that is just at the heart of everything. I used to teach speech classes and things like that, and I didn't want to just get up there and start telling kids, the roles they should have in groups and things like that. No, put them in a group, give them a really intriguing kind of a problem, let them wrestle with it, and then let's break that experience apart. What just happened here? Give them something real that they were invested in that then they can respond to and connect all that curricular stuff to later. It just is kind of a glue that holds things together if you do that right at the beginning. Trevor, you get a chance to drop something in our toolkit too. Any strategy, a resource, whatever you want.
Yeah, you know what? I referenced this. This isn't new work, and my work is contemporary. And so I think just referencing some of those voices that have shaped the understanding, I think of, as I referenced, Jay McTighe, Grant Wiggins, colleague Kath Murdoch out of Australia. She's written 18 books in the field of inquiry. Her first book was published in the early 80s. She hates it when I say that because it dates her, but she's a mentor of mine. I think of Ron Richart and Mark Church and Making Thinking Visible and the powerful work of thinking routines. Current colleague in the math setting, Peter Lojadal, does amazing work with regards to building thinking classrooms. So anyone that's a numeracy listener, a math listener, Peter's work is transformational. Yeah, and Guy Claxton is another one. He's out of the UK. Guy's like 70 years old. He's written like 30 books. And I'm not suggesting everyone go read these books, but when that teacher librarian handed me that life preserver, right, of one book at the right time, it's nice to know that if you're interested in this conversation, what are some names that you can go and Google and go find. And these authors have free offerings all the time, whether it's, a live stream on YouTube or something on, Instagram, that they're doing stuff for free all the time. So just wanted to share some of those names with everyone and a breadcrumb trail to more of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that takes us into our last section here. And I feel like I have many things, but we're going to talk about our one thing. So what is that one thing we're still thinking about? That one big takeaway? What is the one thing we might leave our listeners with? So go ahead, Paul, Winston.
I heard a t-shirt moment in the show, and it was, know me before you teach me. Know me before you teach me. That is kind of at the heart of it too, in addition to the provocation stuff and the curiosity that I mentioned in my toolkit. That really sticks with me. It's always coming back to that personal connection that we have. And the examples that Trevor was sharing, they're very interactive. They're very collaborative. There's a lot of communication happening. It's not a student sitting over in a corner by him or herself. And I think that's key. It's the humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I'm in so much spaces. Like right now, like my mind is thinking about a song by Richie Havens. It's called Follow. And it deals with, there's a line in it that has reminded me of this conversation about this idea of provoke. And it's the way the song comes off. It's a teacher speaking to their classroom as children in a garden, right? And he says in the song, he says, this song may disturb or may quell you. And I really love the idea of provocation as an opportunity to disturb students or quell them, meaning help them bring down their fears of not being able, and know that by asking a question, just by being curious, that they are able to see all the things that are in front of them, right? So that's really just where my mind is going, in this idea of how do we use where our students are to provoke or quell that fear of inadequacy that makes them not believe in themselves. So that's really where my mind is digging into this questioning and increase conversation. So I appreciate that.
I don't feel like I can respond now, Winston. That was so beautiful.
You can, Rena.
I just love the way I just love learning even from y'all and the way your mind works. It's beautiful. I am still stuck at the very beginning when we were calibrating around what, inquiry is, and just this idea of inquiry is curiosity. So how do we get curious? And I know with my own work, especially with educators, and unfortunately it's just like a loss, like how do we also keep educators curious? You talk about hand them the book. Well, how do I keep educators curious so they're not just standing in front of the classroom? Or so I'm thinking of it from that lens.
Trevor, you get to play along.
Yeah,
you get a one thing.
The one thing I'm thinking about, and I think it's bubbling up in everyone's, sharing, is just how to make the work relevant and meaningful for the students that we support. It's I often ask myself the question, what am I doing for my students that they should be doing for themselves? Gosh, I ask myself that question sometimes a dozen times in a single day. And I find the more times I ask that question, the more I find more space to empower kids and have them do more of the heavy lifting and meaningful work in the classroom. So, I think anyone listening that has a question or wants to see a resource or wants to see what that looks like, beyond going to the website, just send me a message. I'm an open book. Quite literally, I have a 360 virtual tour of my classroom that, I'm happy to provide so teachers can go and have a tour and look at videos and click links so they can see what some of these strategies look like and sound like and feel like. So if there's an interest, a curiosity by anyone listening, jump into that curiosity and ask us a question, okay?
Oh man, that's a great way to end, because we hope that we've caused some of y'all to be more curious in this topic and go dig into it. Find the piece that really makes you like, I really want to think more about those questionings. I really want to think about opportunities to flip the classroom to give the students. So really check out this work. We appreciate you coming in, and Trevor, and having a good conversation with us. And I hope that some of our listeners are provoked into action. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Unpacking Education.
We invite you to visit us at avidopenaccess.org, where you can discover resources to support student agency and academic tenacity to create a classroom for future-ready learners.
We'll be back here next Wednesday for a fresh episode of Unpacking Education.
And remember, go forth and be awesome.
Thank you for all you do.
You make a difference.